have essentially said that this will be the only way to prove you have legal identity. And so if you don't participate in that system, as far as the state or the private sector is concerned, you don't exist. I think it's quite clear that the way to force onboarding of a CBDC or this type of digital currency system is going to be some sort of crisis, some sort of event. I think the immigration crises, any sort of refugee situation, that's going to be used to push for digital IDs. I think it's just a very easy excuse for them, a way for them to quickly manufacture consent, because all these people, we don't know who they are. They could be criminals, they could be anybody. We have to know who everybody is. And it's going to be sold as a way to provide security to the insecurity created by the migrant crisis. So I think there's been growing awareness for some time that there's a lot of bipartisan consensus about most of the policies of the US government, like endless war, for example. And some people refer to it as the uniparty. But people also forget that too. And so what a lot of people call this the two-party model, people refer to it sometimes as the left-right paradigm. But I think not a lot of people truly understand how that paradigm works. If you think about it as the left hand and right hand of the establishment, you'll have one of those hands create a problem intentionally, and then the opposing hand comes in and offers the solution. But the solution was always what the establishment wanted, but it's sold as a solution to a problem created by the other side. So it creates the illusion that the opposing force solved a problem, but in reality the problem was manufactured by one hand of the system, and then the solution was offered by the other hand.
Now more than ever, is it important to protect your data online. That's why we ourselves use private internet access to protect our data. Private internet access is more than just any other VPN. Private internet access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection, which keeps your information shielded and bulletproof. Did you know when connecting to any public Wi-Fi network, such as at an airport or restaurant, any nearby hacker can steal your logins, including banking details? Private internet access can protect against this. Before connecting to a public Wi-Fi network, make sure you're connected to the Private Internet Access app and be secure on any device. Private Internet Access has had an audit done by a Big Four firm, as they know VPN use is tied to trust. That's why we use Private Internet Access. Get 83% off and 4 months free of Private Internet Access using our link for a limited time. You can click the link in the description or visit piavpn.com/anonymousofficial to get this deal.
The man that claims to have created CBDCs is a man from Barbados named Oliver Gale. He created one of the first, arguably the first CBDC project in the Caribbean, and then went on to have a key role in creating the Nigerian CBDC, the e-Naira. So the way the CBDC in Nigeria was set up is that in order to access the CBDC, you have to have a national identification number, which is the Nigerian digital ID project. So you have to have a digital ID in order to be able to access the Nigerian CBDC. And the way they tried to get people to onboard to the CBD system was by essentially cutting off the vast majority of the cash in circulation in Nigeria. And so despite the fact that they created these conditions to coerce people into using the CBDC, the populace resists. And that suggests that the idea of CBDCs being a tool for financial inclusion, the public doesn't seem to believe that, right? In Nigeria, these people that ostensibly suffer from this identity gap, that suffer from financial exclusion, don't want the financial inclusion that they're being offered by the CBDC. They don't see any real benefit. They see it as a tool of the state. And the state in Nigeria and in other African countries where these sort of systems are being rolled out, the governments have abused these systems to go after journalists or other people and violate human rights and all sorts of things. So it's not a tool for increased human rights. It's not a tool for increased inclusion. It's inherently exclusionary, and it's a surveillance tool. So if Nigeria's tactic of drastically reducing the amount of cash in circulation didn't work, then I think it's quite clear that the way to force onboarding of a CBDC is going to be some sort of crisis, some sort of event where people will be made an offer they can't refuse, essentially. Whatever that crisis is, that creates this situation where people will have, very little choice but to onboard to this new digital currency system. It could manifest in a number of ways, but regardless of how it manifests, what the narrative is going to be is that privacy is dangerous, anonymity is dangerous, specifically financial privacy is dangerous. Those are going to be the narratives that come out of this event, and that's going to be a way to force onboarding both onto digital currency that can be tracked to stop terror financing or things of that nature. And also we have to know who everybody online is, or we have to know who everybody is interacting with these systems. We need digital ID. Okay. It's very much tied up with efforts to regulate the internet. The effort to regulate the internet, specifically in the United States, has been going on for years. Under the Obama administration, they called it the driver's license for the internet. The idea is to have a government-issued ID be necessary for you to access the internet. And in doing so, they know not just what you're posting and saying online, they know what information you're reading online as well. But the difference is, once it's directly connected to a government-issued ID, they could prosecute you for things like publishing misinformation and all of that. And there's actually been pushes from people like former Google CEO Eric Schmidt to punish people who publish alleged disinformation, and that the need that it's necessary to have IDs connected to social media accounts and to people's internet access as a means of facilitating those kinds of arrests or law enforcement activity. Well, there's a couple of reasons why I think they'd want to have private banks have like a major role in this digital currency system to come. If there's a private sector entity banking you and managing your money, it's much easier for them to bank you than the federal government. So for example, if the Federal Reserve were to do a direct issue CBDC, it would be harder for them to freeze someone's bank account or debank them in any sort of significant way, as opposed to a private company where you have, for example, precedents where JP Morgan Chase, for example, debanked Dr. Mercola and some of his executives and didn't give any reason as to why. They just said, we can no longer provide you with financial services, no questions asked. That would be very hard to do in the case of a direct issued CBDC. This is something similar to the argument that's been made for social media companies censoring. They say, oh, but they're private companies, so they can restrict speech however they want. But we know now that their restrictions on private speech have been a result of public sector pressure, right? So again, people need to keep in mind that this is a public-private partnership. That's the prevailing model in the United States. The digital dollar in the United States is also going to be a public-private model. You'll have the Fed, the central bank, working with the private banks that own the Fed in the United States. And that will be the partnership between them will be the system. It's not going to be all public. It's not going to be all private. It is a partnership. When a crisis is happening, people tend to have emotional responses and tend to be coming from a place of fear. And that tends to prevent people from thinking critically or calmly or rationally about situations or about policies. I think the digital ID is a key enabler of the surveillance, knowing what everyone is doing at the transactional level and being able to tweak that micromanagement based on a person's activity, because the digital ID isn't just limited to the financial system, right? It's like your travel, your health history, your career history, your education credentials, your access to telecommunications, social media, the internet. With the new AI era, right, they can fuse all that data, analyze it, and depending on how they develop that AI algorithm, use it to control people really in unprecedented ways. Well, I think the digital ID and the CBDC and its private sector equivalence project is something that we're always sort of intended to be the same system. So there's documents from the UN, from the BIS, and related groups that are sort of that have been working on this for years. That essentially frame one as essential to the other, using words about, this is inclusionary, the whole, marketing behind digital ID is that everyone needs a legal ID because otherwise they're unable to access essential services, right? And so the idea is we all have to be included in the system, and they directly link that to the concept of financial inclusion and banking the unbanked, which you brought up earlier. But inherently, these systems actually function in an exclusionary way, based on how they've been set up. They have essentially said that this will be the only way to prove you have legal identity, and so if you don't participate in that system, as far as the state or the private sector is concerned, you don't exist. So by not participating in that system, you're inherently excluded from the economic system and really essentially everything. So you have to onboard to the surveillance state or be excluded from everything. So it's, being marketed as inclusion, but it's really inherently exclusionary. BlackRock is positioning themselves to be one of the key players in that space. They acquired, I think they're called GIP, one of the biggest infrastructure, developers in the world. And I think one of their top guys at Davos just a few months ago was talking about how they're betting really big on infrastructure going forward, and it's going to be one of the biggest investment opportunities of the next several decades, actually. So I think they're quite ambitious, and if people aren't aware of this, I'm sure they'll get away with it, but we'll see.